honored to welcome Catherine Howarth OBE, who is the CEO of ShareAction, an organization at the forefront of reshaping the financial system to serve people and the planet. Now, by holding investors accountable and championing responsible investment, ShareAction is driving real systemic change in industries that impact global sustainability. From tackling climate change to advancing human rights, their work empowers investors to use their influence for good. We're here to explore ShareAction's journey, the challenges it's faced, and the future of sustainable finance. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Teresa.
So, in your work with ShareAction, it's been a pioneering force in the responsible investment movement. Can you share the story behind its founding? How you got involved, I think it's nearly 17 years ago, and how this has inspired you?
Sure. It all started with people thinking about their retirement savings and what those were doing when they were invested in companies and then having impacts around the world. And the largest pension scheme in the UK is the university scheme. It's called the University Superannuation Scheme, or USS. And they were very interested and also very expert in what companies get up to, and really started nudging the trustees of that scheme to develop a responsible investment policy and to be really accountable and transparent about what was happening to that investment and what impact it had in the world. And that campaign was very successful, and USS developed kind of a world-leading responsible investment policy. And then our organization was founded to try and take that work right across the rest of the investment industry in the UK and ultimately all over the world. People think, that their money comes out of a paycheck and into what can feel like a black box, which is global financial institutions that then allocate that capital to companies and industries and geographies around the world. And what happens to that money matters. It matters to all of us in shaping the future and shaping our own lives, of course, in building wealth for us. So it kind of makes sense to have an organization like ours that's a watchdog on all of that.
And tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you get on this pathway of all arenas and areas when you're passionate about climate?
I actually fell into this work because before I worked here, I was a community organizer. And in the East End of London, the big financial district, Canary Wharf, was being kind of constructed really from the old docklands, from the old docks. And these huge towers were going up. The world's largest banks, JP Morgan, HSBC, they were all building new towers there. And the community around there said, well, maybe we could just ask those banks to pay the living wage to the people that arrive at nighttime to clean those buildings. And someone said, well, why don't you buy some shares in those banks and go to their annual shareholder meetings and ask those questions? And so I did. I went to, with one of the cleaners, the HSBC and the Barclays annual general meetings, and we had tremendous success. It was a huge press story, actually. And first Barclays, then HSBC became the first banks in the UK to commit to the real living wage at Canary Wharf. And I figured this business of owning shares can really open up dialogue with people that are difficult to meet, like the leaders of some of the largest banks in the world. And then I got so curious, like, how do you actually build a whole organization out of this? So that's kind of my journey.
But as an individual or with perhaps a small collection of people, how do you just go into a bank or try to interface with an investor on the small scale when ShareAction was in its early days and affect that change? Did you just walk in the front door?
Well, you can always walk in the front door of a bank, but if you want to have influence, you better buy the shares of, that bank. It's through shareholding that we have got well inside the system and in the door. And what's been very strategic is that, yes, we do buy a small number of shares so we can turn up and ask those questions at the annual shareholder meetings. But we've been very strategic about building relationships and getting closely engaged with the very, very large institutional investors. Those are the biggest investors. They own all of the corporate entities around the world in every sector. And if you really want to have influence on corporate behavior, then you need to build strong relationships with the institutional investors or these big pension schemes. And so that's what I think has differentiated us, is that we have combined the voice of small shareholders with a significant level of quite sophisticated influence with the largest institutional shareholders.
So then why should the everyday person care? Because most people think, I don't have that type of influence to leverage at the individual level. So how can they affect change? It has to be on a larger collective level, obviously.
It does. It requires organization, and it requires collaboration, and collectively our votes do count. And so what we're trying to do is organize those individual voices into something bigger and establish a dialogue with the large institutions that manage money collectively on behalf of many of us. They have what are called fiduciary duties or legal duties to act on our behalf. And often that system isn't very kind of consumer friendly or really listening out for what people are concerned about. So knocking on the door is important, and it's about holding power in finance accountable, just as we all, I think, believe in holding political power accountable too.
Mm-hmm. So in Britain, for example, it seems one of the portions or areas that ShareAction is involved with was with pension change and really making that a more, I guess, broader knowledge throughout the UK. Can you share a little bit about that initial success?
I still feel we're in the foothills of this. So huge numbers of people who do belong to a workplace pension scheme, and they really don't know much about what happens next. They know that hopefully when they retire, maybe several decades away, there'll be something as a result of that saving that means they can afford to have a retirement and not work forever. But what's really happening is that money is at work in the economy. It's being invested in companies, maybe small ones that are hoping to grow, but also large ones that pay out a lot of dividends and are filling the shelves at the supermarket with their products, that are really constructing our world in so many ways. It's all happening in the corporate community, and it's all our money, but people don't realize that. So a lot of what we've tried to do is really educate people about, look, that's your money, and what happens to it matters to you, and you can have a bit of influence. And I think we're getting there with that message coming through, but it's still kind of, I guess, most people shrug and think, what's that got to do with me? Even though actually people are extremely interested in corporate behavior and deeply believe that companies should behave in a responsible way. And it's literally their business because they own those businesses collectively. Mm-hmm. So I think what we've tried to do and been quite successful at is just make that common knowledge and then create the mechanisms where people can actually come together to have that influence collectively.
So on one level, you're saying that an individual can go in and check at their company or their workplace where their pension invested. So that's on one hand. But on the other hand, don't you need to take it even to a higher level? You need to approach that industry, that higher level investor, that specific industry. You need to go in deeper, right, than just the individual level?
Definitely. So the majority of our work at ShareAction is actually where we build these really large coalitions of big institutional investors that between them have quite sizable shareholdings in across different sectors and in specific large firms. So a good example would be Nestle. Nestle is the largest food manufacturer in the world. It's a Swiss headquartered company. Dozens of products. It's huge in pet food. It's a real giant. And we've been working for several years, not just with Nestle, but with a wide range of manufacturers of food in the US as well. And the focus of that work has been trying to encourage these companies to think about and be more transparent about the health impacts of their foods, because we have globally a major epidemic of obesity. It's really has huge health impacts for individuals, but actually economically and at an economy-wide level, it has enormous costs and impacts on our public health systems and for employers and so on. And so we've been saying, look, that the food manufacturing industry needs to operate in a responsible way. And yes, we want food manufacturers to be profitable entities, but not at the cost of, more extremely sugary breakfast cereals that are marketed at kids. And, there's some standards that we want to see, and we want to start by having greater transparency around all of that. So we brought investors together. It's a good example of what we've done. We're always working in coalitions and collaborations. because when people speak with one united voice, it's obviously more powerful and effective. It also is very cost effective to work together. And we've had significant success and traction with some of the major supermarkets in the UK, and we're beginning to with these major food manufacturers. And this year we were very present with a shareholder proposal that went to a vote at the AGM, the annual general meeting of Nestle in Switzerland. Since then, the company has a new CEO, and we're in a very, very promising new stage of the dialogue with them. And actually, we've been making the business case for this switch to health. Like, ultimately, governments around the world are challenging big food that operates in a way that's all about feeding us stuff that's junk. We're seeing sugar taxes come in all over the world. We're saying there's actually a business case as well as a sort of ethical case for moving the global food manufacturing sector towards things that are nutritious and positive for our bodies.
So are you seeing specific success stories? And I know, as you're saying, you're talking about it, shaping the communication, and they're open to it. But is there a particular scenario that you can think of or share that they went in and said, okay, we're going to reduce 5 grams of sugar for all these different candy bars, or okay, now we're going to put out drinks that don't have 45 grams of sugar, they have 20. Like, are there specific cases where it's actually affected change?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, we've made some progress with Nestle, but I would say we're not as far as I would like yet. So it's still a work in progress. But the UK's largest supermarket chain is called Tesco. And they committed in 2021 to a significant rebalancing of their total food sales towards healthy, and to set a target for 65% of all food sales being what would be categorized in a robust, independent, government-led definition of healthy. So they would move to 65% of sales being healthy. And that was actually by 2025. So we've been tracking them all along, but they need to hit that target by 2025. And if they haven't quite hit that target, we're coming back to their annual general meeting and re-engaging them. Because when you get companies to set stretching targets, and we've done that, whether it's on renewable energy use or on healthy foods, you absolutely then need to keep an eye on what happens next, because companies do like to announce. It's like governments like to announce lovely sounding targets and then hope no one's looking. So there's the work always goes on.
So how do you manage or work on changing the mindsets of these companies when they are also responsible for the profits? And that's what the investors are looking at. So are they facing short-term losses? Are they saying, okay, no, this will be successful for the long term? Because that's a big challenge, the profit part.
It is. But listen, I really don't think that the things we ask companies to do are compatible with great losses of income or profitability. In fact, we're often highlighting things that are very much part of a positive trend, driven often by regulation, because governments across the world, let's take the obesity stuff, like the taxes coming in for sugar, and also consumer trends and the fact that there are new drugs that are helping people with their weight. These are all factors that actually make it riskier for companies if they only sell sugary junk. So we're very much focusing on long-term risk management, aligning with the future of regulation, but also we are saying that if you're a pension scheme invested in a food manufacturer, it won't be your only holding. You'll be invested in companies right across the economy. And so if one company that is manufacturing sugary foods is operating in a way that actually imposes costs across the rest of the economy, and all the other companies in the portfolio, it may be making a big profit, but actually if it's at the expense of the rest of the portfolio, that's not so smart. So we're actually trying to take a more systemic view of what's profitable at the portfolio level. And that really motivates a lot of these large pension schemes. And they're also thinking, well, who are we investing for? We're investing for people. And people are saying they want to eat healthier. They want to operate in a world with clean energy, less pollution. So, yes, we want to make profits, but not in a way that costs the living standards that we want to enjoy and the security that we want to enjoy. Like, if we've had too much climate pollution and carbon pollution, and then we end up with wildfires and flooding and all those challenges, it hasn't been so smart to make profit in a way that drove those problems. So it is about calibrating profit, but making it in a way that doesn't produce other problems further down the line. And that's the fundamental, I think, very rational and very compelling argument for responsible investment practice.
Well, it makes complete sense. So then talking about they're understanding it, but do you then face issues with greenwashing? And if you can explain a little bit about that and what you encounter.
Oh, we do. So, I mean, the phenomenon of greenwashing, which is where either companies or indeed financial institutions present a tremendously positive view of how ethical and environmental and socially responsible they're being, when that doesn't quite tally up with the reality of what they're doing. It's a real problem. It's a sign, though, that they recognize that that's what consumers want, that they want to even put out that image. But it does require really tough regulatory oversight. It requires really strong journalistic oversight. And I have to say, there are an amazing set of journalists around the world working for, the business media, but also the mainstream media, broadcast, and also, print media that are really hot on keeping companies accountable around greenwash. But there's obviously clearly a role for nonprofits like mine as well. And people have become more and more cynical about companies doing this. And so part of our function is to highlight to asset management firms that there's actually real commercial and regulatory risk in over promising and under delivering when it comes to responsibility and environmental performance. So yeah, it's a huge challenge. It's a major part of our work at ShareAction is doing really rigorous research to show what's the real performance. And we publish these rankings, and the banks, the ones that come at the top love it. The ones that come at the bottom get really annoyed, but it drives performance higher. And I think it's crucial that there should be credible information in the public arena that people can go to where they know, the bank I use is credible on this or not, because it matters to consumers.
So you're really holding them accountable to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. I don't know if you want to call any particular company or entity out, but when we were talking about greenwashing, is there one that you've seen that really, became accountable because whether there was, a journalist following up on them, someone like ShareAction following up on them, and did they have?
So, well, I mean, we do these rankings, and the top ranked asset manager in the world is a Dutch company called Robeco. So I don't mind praising them. And then there's a massive French fund manager called Amundi, and they're also really good. None of them are perfect, but in our objective research, they do a good job. And what we like is the fact that can then result in them getting additional custom, because we want doing this well to be commercially rewarded, and being highlighted as a greenwasher or really just a poor performer should be punished in the commercial marketplace for the services in asset management or in banks or whatever. And then also regulatory oversight and financial supervisors should be completely hot on this. And I will say that's happened. Like the SEC is very focused on this. The German regulator has come down on a number of companies. The UK's Financial Conduct Authority, which is our big financial supervisor, has a whole massive team now working on greenwashing and challenging this. So I think consumers and people at large should take some comfort that there's some credibility in the claims now made by financial institutions. But it's been a little bit of a Wild West for a while. And I think we're getting to a better place where you can't get away with empty boasts.
Yeah, no more just talk. You've made headway with Nestle, you're saying, with Tesco. What about other sectors that are really influential, whether it be chemicals or something else you want to share with us?
Yeah, well, you mentioned chemicals, and that's been a big focus for us. I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves that 95% of manufactured products rely on chemicals, and the sector is collectively responsible for about 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's kind of a hidden sector because it's tends to be B2B, and, the manufacturing of a huge variety of chemicals is something most of us don't think about every day because it's just happening in factories far away, but it's a very, very impactful sector and a little bit hidden away. And so we felt that they were not getting the scrutiny required. So we've been working with a wonderful group of large investors, a mixture of pension funds and foundations and asset management companies, to do really granular, detailed research on 13 of the largest chemical companies in the world that are all based in Europe, actually. But there are some major players in the US that I think deserve the same level of scrutiny. And we're deep in dialogue with them about, the environmental credentials of the feedstocks they use that go into the chemical engineering process, and how they can transition to renewables, set stretching targets. These are tough conversations. It's a hard sector to decarbonize. Genuinely, some of the solutions there are more expensive in the short term, but ultimately, this is an industry that needs to make that transition if we're going to stay climate safe. One of them is the world's largest fertilizer manufacturer, a company called Yara International. I met with the CEO along with a group of investors last week, and, it's a work in progress. I think it really counts for these companies to hear that sustained, persistent call for progress and effort.
Yeah. But is their mindset that if it's not broken, why fix it? Or are they open to understanding they need to think, further ahead with our climate and our planet?
Like in any industry, you have like old schoolers that don't want to make the shift. And then you've got enlightened leaders that recognize change as an inevitability. Actually, chemicals is a really interesting one because let's take that company, Yara International, massive manufacturer of fertilizer, nitrogen-based fertilizer, which, when the technological breakthrough happened, like at the beginning of the 20th century, it created a world in which we've been able to feed 7 million people plus. That is an industry where technology and change utterly transformed both the growth of that industry, but also the impact on feeding the world. And so they really know about technological breakthrough. They know that we need to have next generation of technological breakthroughs or innovations in the chemistry. So I kind of feel with that industry, like many, they're kind of stuck in a business as usual model, but there are smart people that know things have to change. And actually, the companies that invest in the R&D and bring the solutions forward could be the next generation of major winners in that industry. As soon as, and it's inevitable, we eventually have a cost on carbon, that's an industry where if you have the process that's decarbonized, you're in a far better commercial position. So I think the work that we do genuinely plays a role in moving mindsets, in creating new incentives, and in ultimately creating a reward for being a leader.
In that vein of understanding that change is happening, do some companies and sectors have it more difficult due to the global dynamics? Are you afraid of rollbacks and issues with this?
I firmly believe that the path to sustainable business is ultimately irresistible, just because we're moving into a phase where we're really starting to pay the costs in quite financial, but also in scary ways in terms of human lives, of operating in a way that's in tension with the natural world and with the environment. Like, we have to get aligned. We have to move to more circular business models and really embed sustainability. But at the same time, there's been a lot of money made in other ways of operating that people don't want to leave behind. So we're in a real, kind of an existential, challenging time. And I actually think the US is so interesting from this point of view, because this is seen as a sort of an issue that Republicans are really not engaged with so much. But you know what? Like, Texas and some of the Republican states are the most far advanced in the rollout of renewable
energy,
power and energy. So I really think there's actually a very powerful financial logic now to this transition. And if you look across the world as a whole, the fastest growing continent in the world in terms of population growth is Africa, with incredible potential for renewable rollout. And at the same time in Asia, they're still building coal-fired power stations because there's huge populations that still want to have cheap electricity and so on. So these are really, really tough struggles. And I don't want to predict that it's all going to be plain sailing, but I do think that fundamentally the direction of travel is set. The risks are very clear. They become clear all the time. The impact of one of the things we're really trying to do is make sure that in boardrooms, they really understand the science around some of this stuff. And that's really informing board decision making. Again, I go back to that point I made that, all of us are actually not just a part of this system, but we have a real stake. Like if we have money in a retirement account or in savings, there are votes being cast at those companies on our behalf, and we're really entitled to know what they are and to express our interest in this. So the more we build a movement of people that care about responsible and sustainable investment, the more rapidly we accelerate. But I still think that change is ultimately irresistible and inevitable.
And are you finding that certain nations are more receptive to sustainable finance, whether it's the US or the UK? I mean, I know your journey began in the UK and it's spread since.
So when we do these global assessments, the leading firms are continental European firms. They're Dutch, Swiss, French. There is somehow, I don't know why, because those are also places of great wealth, and they have very large pension systems, not as large as the US. In the US, there's a huge range, but overall not as far advanced as Europe when it comes to really hardwiring this through regulation and through customer practice in the investment industry. So there is quite a bit of variety. And then in Asia, this is coming up the track really fast. Like we see some of the fastest improvers globally in terms of responsible investment practice being Asian firms. But they're coming from quite a way back. So it's a real mixed picture. And what we're trying to do at ShareAction is create a global competition, a race to the top on this.
So I want to bring it a little back from the macro level to the micro level.
Yeah.
For our listeners who are listening to this, and do you feel that people still have that angst of how do I make a difference as an individual? I know they can go in and find out where their pension fund is invested, but how does someone who's listen to everything you've shared today turn around tomorrow and say, okay, what do I do? What would you say is step one for them?
Well, I mean, just to be practical, there you can absolutely just come on our website and find out a bit more about what we do and sign up and get involved, because we're really trying to operate in a way that allows people to plug in. But I also think that if you are part of a workplace, typically all the people in that workplace belong to the same workplace pension scheme or retirement savings arrangement. And so that's an area where you can already and it doesn't have to be done in an aggressive way, but these are just reasonable questions to ask, because typically your employer and you are both contributing together into a savings plan, but your employer chose that plan for you. And they really vary in terms of how engaged and serious they are on sustainability. So just ask the questions, and maybe, you might be part of a group already in the workplace that's plugged into these issues and is raising this. And there's often green groups or whatever it might be at the workplace. So have them think about this dimension as well as thinking about, the recycling or whatever it might be at the office. So, because I do really think we need to recognize that perhaps the most impactful thing any of us could do is make sure that our money is operating in a way that's aligned with sustainability goals, whereas some of those personal choices may be harder to do and actually less impactful.
Yeah. Well, you have a really refreshing optimism, so it's not all gloom and doom.
Definitely not. Definitely not. I don't know why I seem to have been born and blessed with this strangely optimistic streak. Even though I work on some of the really toughest issues, I've always believed that when nothing changes in the world without people getting organized and expressing their demand for change together, and that should be true in this realm as well as in politics, community level, and all the rest.
So then, as we look toward the next decade, what is your vision for the future of sustainable finance and how ShareAction can continue to lead the way?
Well, my vision is that more people would understand and more would be empowered to participate in ensuring that our money, and after all, money makes the world go round, is really not just building us wealth, but serving our interests from a point of view of, protecting our security, making us healthier. And so my vision is that we would just all this is why I'm so excited to be on your podcast, because communication is so crucial to this. We need to get so much smarter and more creative about how to communicate this message, because it can sound a bit dreary, finance and pensions, people like groan when they hear it, but actually it's so important. And so my vision is that we develop ever more creative and smart relational tactics to hold accountable those biggest companies and biggest financial institutions, and that we become a bigger, funner, friendlier, more inclusive movement. So that's what we're going to try and keep doing.
Sharing this message and delving into this detail that you've helped us with our listeners here, it makes a lot of sense for every person. You don't have to be, the ultimate financial investor. Now it makes complete sense that it's the every person. And
100%.
we all have a hand in it. So thank you so much. It was a really engaging conversation. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Teresa. It's been lovely to talk.
Thank you.